On the morning of April 30th, 1997, the Altidor family began their day. Just like any other, 29-year-old Marie Altidor was at home caring for her. 2 baby girls, Samantha, just 2 years old, and tiny little Sabrina, barely 6 weeks old. Alongside them was Marie's mother, 68-year-old Teresa Laverne, who was there to lend a helping hand. Their home in Miramar, Florida, was filled with the sounds of giggles, baby cries, and the comforting presence of family. Like every morning, Marie's husband, George, left for work at exactly 7 o'clock. It was part of their usual routine, but as the day went on and afternoon rolled around, George did what any husband and father would do. He called home to check in with a new baby in the house. He probably wanted to know how Marie was holding up, if the baby was sleeping okay, or if she needed anything. But something didn't feel right. The first call went unanswered. Then the second and the third. This wasn't like them. With 2 adults at home, someone should have picked up. Even if they had stepped out for a moment, Marie or her mother would have called back. But the silence on the other end only made George's worry grow. With this being said, he reached out to his brother-in-law and asked him to stop by the house. Maybe the phone was just misplaced, or they had gone outside for a bit. But when his brother-in-law arrived at the house, he was met with something that would shock him for decades to come. The bodies of Marie, her mother Teresa, and her 2 baby girls, Samantha and Sabrina, were found under circumstances so horrifying that even today, those who witnessed the scene are haunted by the memories. The home that had once been filled with warmth, laughter, and the innocent giggles of children had been turned into something unrecognizable, a place of pure horror. But the big question is, who could have done this? The Altidor family had no known enemies. In fact, they were widely known as a kind, loving, and peaceful family. They weren't involved in any conflicts, nor did they have any ties to crime. So why were they targeted in such a brutal and merciless way? To even begin to understand, we need to step back and truly get to know Marie Altidor, the woman at the heart of this family. By all accounts, Marie Carmel Altidor was a woman of quiet strength, resilience, and grace. She was originally from Haiti, where she grew up with big dreams of a better life. Like so many immigrants, she faced many struggles adjusting to a new country, but she never let obstacles break. Her spirit determined to create a brighter future. She eventually settled in the warm, welcoming embrace of South Florida. Now, Marie's faith was also an important part of her life. After settling in Florida, she began attending the Haitian Evangelical Baptist Church in Miami. It was there that she met the man who would become her husband, George Altidor, originally from Haiti. George was also known for taking both his religion and education seriously. Like many others, chasing a better future. He eventually moved to South Florida, where he became an active member of the same church Maria attended, but they weren't the first to fall in love. In fact, George had been married once before, and even had a son with his ex-wife. However, their marriage ended in divorce in September of 1991, not long after George and Marie's paths crossed and a romance blossomed. By February of 1994, they were married, and later that same year, they welcomed their first child together, a beautiful baby girl named Samantha. In the summer of 1995, the Altidor family moved to Miramar, Florida, purchasing a 4-bedroom home with a pool in a peaceful neighborhood. They were settling into a comfortable and fulfilling life. Marie had started working as a secretary for the Dade County School Board's information office, where she also helped produce a morning radio program in Creole. George, on the other hand, worked as a plant manager for Aqua Air Products, a marine air conditioning company in Hialeah, a job he had dedicated over a decade to. On top of that, he had also earned his real estate license and began working part-time as a real estate agent. Those who knew the Altidor described them as a quiet, church-going family, deeply involved with their congregation. Sundays were always reserved for church services, often followed by gatherings with fellow parishioners and family members. Their faith was the foundation of their lives, giving them strength, purpose, and a strong sense of community. By early 1997, their family was growing once again. Marie was pregnant with their second child, and in March, they welcomed their youngest daughter, Sabrina, with a newborn and a toddler at home. Marie's mother, Teresa Laverne, who still lived in Haiti, made plans to fly to Florida. She wanted to support her daughter during this precious but exhausting time, and also be there for her granddaughter's christening, scheduled for the first week of May. Any mother knows that having an extra pair of hands during those exhausting first weeks with a newborn is invaluable, especially when there's also a toddler to care for. Marie was surely grateful for her mother's presence, helping to balance the joys and challenges of motherhood. On the morning of April 30th, 1997, everything seemed normal in the Altidor household. Teresa had already arrived from Haiti, and the family was settling into a routine. According to George, he left for work at exactly 7 in the morning, just as he always did inside their home. Marie, Teresa, and the 2 little girls were still there, likely starting their day like any other, according to family and friends. George had a habit of calling home during the day to check on Marie and the kids while he was at work. That day was no different. He first called the house around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but no one answered, thinking little of it. He tried again an hour later at 3 o'clock, but once more there was no response. This was unusual. Marie was still on maternity leave, meaning she was typically home at that time. If she had stepped out for a moment, her mother Teresa should have been there to answer the phone. But the continued silence on the other end of the line was unsettling. This got him so worried that he decided to reach out to his brother-in-law, asking him to go over and check on Marie, Teresa, and the children. His brother-in-law agreed quickly, grabbing his son and heading to the Altidor house to see what was going on. They got to the house around 5 in the afternoon for a while. They kept knocking and calling out, but no one answered. That's when his brother-in-law decided to try the door. To his surprise, it wasn't even locked. Remember, his son was with him at the time. As they both stepped inside, the first thing they noticed was the bassinet sitting right in front of the TV. At first, it didn't seem out of place, but as they got closer, their stomachs dropped inside. Baby Sabrina lay completely still, her tiny body covered in blood. That alone was horrifying, but what he saw next shattered him even more just a few feet away in the kitchen. His mother Teresa was lying in a pool of her own blood. The brother-in-law was so shocked, so overwhelmed that he immediately grabbed his son and ran out of the house yelling for help. He called out to the neighbors, desperate for someone to confirm if his mother and niece were still alive. One of the neighbors quickly dialed 911, and that call came in at exactly 5:42 p.m., reporting what they had just found. When police arrived just minutes later, they had no idea what they were about to walk into, because the scene on the other side of that door would haunt even the most seasoned investigators for years to come. 6-week-old. Sabrina was still in her bassinet in the living room, but the sight was horrifying. Her tiny body showed clear signs of a brutal beating. Officers believed she had been struck repeatedly with a blunt object a few steps away in the kitchen. Lay Teresa, her body sprawled on the floor. She had been shot in the head, and like the baby, had also been beaten to death. But the horror didn't end there. As officers moved through the house, they found 2 more bodies, one in the corner of the living room and another in the dining room. It was there that Marie was found face down in a pool of blood, and her injuries are even more gruesome. She had been shot multiple times in the chest, stabbed, and then bludgeoned in the head. The level of violence was beyond anything the officers had expected. The last victim was 2-year-old Samantha. She had been found in the living room wedged between the couch and a chair, unlike the others. Her position suggested that she had been trying to hide, but it hadn't saved her. She too had been beaten to death. The sheer brutality of the crime forced investigators to dig deeper, and as they combed through the house, they were left baffled. It quickly became clear that robbery was not the motive. The furniture was undisturbed, electronics untouched, and valuable jewelry remained exactly where it was left. Strangely, no murder weapon was found at the scene. Then came an even more unsettling discovery. There were no signs of forced entry. The doors were unlocked, nothing was broken, and there was no evidence of a struggle near the entrance. This pointed to a chilling possibility that the killer was someone. The family knew someone who didn't need to force their way inside someone they trusted enough to let in outside in the gated yard. Officers found the family dog, but according to reports, the dog was friendly, not the type to bark or attack even at strangers. This raised an even more disturbing question. Was the killer a complete outsider who simply went unnoticed? Or was it someone much closer, someone who belonged there? As the detectives continued searching the home, they stumbled upon a chilling clue in one of the rooms. A message scrawled on the wall in messy handwriting. "I want my $100,000 drug money. They stole my drugs." At first glance, it seemed to point to a drug deal gone wrong, a violent retaliation. But there was one glaring problem after a thorough search of the home. Investigators found no trace of drugs, no hidden stashes, no paraphernalia, nothing. Even more puzzling, neither Maureen nor George had any known connections to drugs or illegal dealings. This led to a series of unanswered questions that didn't add up. If this was really a drug deal gone wrong, why was the jewelry left untouched? Why didn't the killer even try to check George's office, where the supposed drug money could have been hidden? If they were desperate to get their money back, wouldn't they have searched every inch of the house? And the most disturbing question of all, why would a thief or a drug dealer take the time to brutally beat a 6-week-old baby to death? There was no logic to it. By now, it was clear to detectives that this wasn't about money. This was rage. The chilling message scrawled on the wall demanding drug money was nothing more than a smokescreen, a desperate attempt to mislead the investigation. With no signs of forced entry and no clear motive that pointed to an outsider, detectives had to consider a disturbing possibility. The killer wasn't a stranger at all, and the most obvious suspect, George Aylor, in countless cases like this. When an entire family is slaughtered so brutally, the perpetrator is usually someone within the household, someone with a personal vendetta. When news of the murders first broke, George was caught on camera, devastated, trying to push past officers to get inside the house. He looked frantic, broken, desperate to see his family. At first glance, it seemed like the reaction of a grieving husband and father. But then, when it was time for questioning, his behavior took a drastic shift. Instead of being overwhelmed with sorrow or demanding justice for his wife and children, George was eerily calm. He didn't ask about the investigation. He didn't plead for the killer to be found. Instead, he simply said, "It's in God's hands. God will prevail. Jesus knows." To detectives, this response was unsettling. Yes, George was known to be deeply religious, but his lack of urgency, his almost passive acceptance of the tragedy, didn't sit right with them. Most grieving husbands and fathers would be overcome with emotion, demanding answers, desperate for justice. But George, he was unfazed. He failed to provide any real answers, barely engaged in the questioning, and then just as calmly as he had walked in, he got up and left. Although George consistently denied any involvement in the murders, detectives found it increasingly difficult to eliminate him as a suspect. Those close to him said he knew people would start asking questions he seemingly didn't want to answer. Meanwhile, detectives continued to pore over the evidence, chasing every possible lead. They ruled out robbery, they ruled out drugs, but no matter how much they investigated, they couldn't rule out George. A handwriting analysis was conducted to compare George's writing to the chilling message left on the wall, but the results were not a match. Even so, detectives couldn't shake the feeling that George was hiding something. One would think that if your entire family was brutally murdered, you would stop at nothing to help the police hunt down the person responsible. But not George. From the very beginning, detectives noticed something off about his behavior. While most grieving husbands and fathers would be desperate for answers, George was described as aggressively uncooperative during the investigation. He didn't ask questions. He didn't demand updates. And after just his second interview with police, he stopped speaking to them altogether. But then, detectives discovered something that shook the case even further. On the morning of the murders at exactly 7:09 a.m., a call was placed from the family's home to Marie's uncle, who was living in Washington, D.C. at the time. He didn't answer, but his wife did. However, she wasn't sure who exactly she spoke to. Although she initially believed it was Marie, she wasn't familiar with her voice. And when Marie's family learned about the call, they began to suspect that it wasn't actually her. And here's why. That phone call made no sense. The timing of the call was critical. It was made exactly 9 minutes after George was said to have left for work, where he arrived at 7:30 a.m. Now, if Marie was still alive at that time, then George physically could not have been the killer. There simply wouldn't have been enough time for him to commit 4 brutal murders and make it to work on time. But if Marie wasn't the one on that call, then who was? And could it mean that there was another suspect? Despite this eerie and unexplained phone call, detectives found themselves hitting a dead end. They followed every lead. They knocked on doors, questioned neighbors, retraced George's movements, and dug deep into his past. But after weeks turned into months and months into years, the case stalled. A $155,000 reward was even offered in hopes that anyone would come forward with new information. But as time went on and no fresh lead surfaced, the reward was withdrawn and the case went completely cold. Still, Marie's family refused to give up. They held vigils and memorials to keep the story alive. They reached out to true crime shows, hoping the national spotlight might uncover new evidence. And throughout it all, they remained firm in their belief that George knew more than he was saying. As the years passed, George moved on a few years after his wife and children were killed. he remarried and relocated to Oklahoma. Now, his decision to remarry shocked Marie's family. But when they learned who he married, their grief turned to anger. The night before the murders, George had reportedly been at the home of a female friend, someone familiar to both him and Marie. He claimed he was there to fix an air conditioning unit, but rumors swirled that he had been having an affair with this woman. Though he was the only suspect in the case, he has never been charged in connection with the brutal murders of his wife, daughters, and mother-in-law. It is almost unthinkable that someone could slaughter 4 innocent people, including a 6-week-old baby, and still walk among society. The crime scene was so gruesome that many officers and detectives involved in the case required counseling to cope with what they had seen. The pain endured by the victim's family never faded, and the weight of their loss remains as heavy as ever. Justice may be slow, but it should never be silent. Cases like this remind us that there are still families waiting for answers, still victims whose voices need to be heard. And for us, it's an incredible honor to share the story of the Altidor family, hoping that someone out there knows something that could finally bring justice to this case. Now, I want to hear your thoughts. Do you believe George was responsible? Or do you think the woman who made the call 9 minutes after George left for work had something to do with it? Could there be another unknown suspect? Let us know your theories in the comments below.